Sinisterhood.
We've received a lot of great feedback about this episode. Great feedback feels weird to say because it's such a heinous topic. But people, I wish that we could share all of the stories that people share with us just to show how insidious and persistent stalking can be, and also how common. It's wild how many people out there have so many, from he stalked me for a couple weeks after we broke up to a lifetime of it.
Yeah, and underreported, and that's something we'll get to towards the latter half of this episode when we start discussing some of the laws and how they've developed. But even with the statistics that we have on stalking, there have been so many people who, like myself, whenever we finished our conversation with Dana and Debbie last week, I was like, oh, I was stalked. Because you tend to use language that's minimizing of oh, I just dated this crazy person once, or he was kind of a little weird after we dated. But you realize these behaviors actually fall under a legal definition. And so because it disproportionately impacts women, and we have sort of been taught, at least, my generation and older, of don't take up space. Don't really, just don't make a big deal out of it. Could you just not mention it? We tend to be it's fine. I'm fine. It's totally fine.
And for our own preservation and safety.
True, that too. Yeah. What if I had, you go if I reported it, is it going to make it worse? And in some cases, I mean, it's one of those things. You have the absolute right to report this and to handle it however you want. But just given what we know, the statistics of what's already been reported, there have been so many comments, emails sent to us and stuff of I thank you for covering this because I didn't even realize. And now to be able to claim it and name it, you can hopefully move past it. Hopefully it is ceased and you can move past it. But that is the value of storytelling and story sharing. So we're very, very pleased that we got this opportunity to meet and know Debbie Riddle, who's incredible.
Absolutely. And Dana Flightman too.
Oh, absolutely.
They are just both incredible people. Debbie, the love a sister has for another sister. We've seen it in many other cases that they're the ones that until she takes her last breath, she'll be fighting Peggy's fight. And it's just a love that is overwhelming. It's beautiful to see, but at the same time, it's so sad that she's in a position where she has to do this because she lost her sister.
Right. You're as much good as you do, you kind of still miss that empty seat at the Christmas dinner table,
Absolutely.
Where somebody should be here. And because of a horrible, heinous act by this man, she is unfortunately not.
Yes. If you haven't listened to part 1, go back and do so you have all the information on what led up to what we will be discussing in this episode. Well, I'm Christy.
I'm Heather.
And let's get into it. On August 29th, 2002, Peggy asked police in her new hometown of Turlock, California, whether her restraining order against Patrick from New Mexico was valid across state lines. Turlock police checked the national database, where the order should have been filed, but found nothing. Unfortunately for Peggy, the kind of order she had received would not have been entered. Rather than a domestic violence protective order, Peggy had been granted a mutual protective order without a hearing held. Because she was not given the opportunity to testify during the initial proceedings, the restraining order she got was not the strongest type available. In order to get a new protective order in California, Patrick would have to be served with papers from Turlock authorities, letting him know where Peggy had moved. For her safety, Peggy opted not to proceed.
You can see this kind of rock in a hard place, a crack that you fall into of, oh, well, actually, sorry, because of paperwork, you're not protected.
And already how the laws are not designed to protect the victims. In fact, she's now put in the position of, well, do I want to keep myself safer, maybe, and reveal my location, which in turn makes me not safer? Or am I just going to roll the dice here? The onus should not be on the victim to have to make these decisions. Lawmakers should have laws that protect them, regardless of where they travel, from their stalkers without having to alert their stalker that they've moved.
Yeah, and I hate to play, Monday morning quarterback, but from a client advocacy perspective, Peggy's attorney should have said, I'm sorry, Your Honor, we cannot agree to a mutual protective order without a hearing. We have like 16 binders full of stuff, and we need to show, Your Honor, that he has no evidence of what he's talking about. From Peggy's perspective, as a client, she may have said, hey, I don't really want to proceed. But in 9 times out of 10, if you were to tell, especially somebody who had been through as much as Peggy, hey, you are going to have to face him in court. However, the result is going to be X. Or you don't face him in court and the protective order you're going to get is like 50% as powerful. It's not going to be in a national database. It's not going to show up when he travels across state lines and try to check a gun. What do you want to do? And if your client says, oh, you know what? I understand it's going to be a weaker one, but I really just can't face him. That's the client's choice. But to sort of go, we'll just do this. It's going to be faster and easier. And for all, especially the fact that Peggy could even afford to have an attorney, you know, that you see that there's so many barriers to vulnerable people when they need to be fully informed and have a victim's advocate going, hey, your attorney can tell you this, but I just want you to know if you ever need a restraining order, where are you moving to? California? Let's look the laws up really quick. Yeah, you'd have to tell them where you lived. You know, it's like the client has got to be made aware of the consequences of what they're agreeing to.
Absolutely. And she may not have wanted to do that because she had been dealing with it for so long. And also then you're pissing them off more and dragging your family through more stuff. And I mean, it's always the client's decision. I don't think she was given all of the information to make a fully informed decision.
And it sounds, from our conversation with Debbie, it did sound like that Peggy thought, oh, a protective order, I got one, and was not informed this one is weak in these ways.
I didn't even know that there was a difference in the types that you could get until this. So, yeah.
And it varies from state to state, too, which is the difficult thing and is why it's so important for victims of this to have competent counsel and victims advocates.
Indeed, Peggy and her family were so concerned Patrick would find her in Turlock that they intentionally kept Peggy's location a secret when speaking on the phone with her. The family feared that if Patrick couldn't reach Peggy to kill her, he may target their mom. Out of extra caution, Peggy's mom reactivated an old security system at her home. Debbie told interviewers that checking the neighborhood for strange cars became the norm and that she constantly feared for the safety of her children, saying,
I watched my girls like a hawk and kept our doors and windows locked at all times. Just hypervigilant. You have to be.
And we see the ripple effect of it's not just the direct target that is being impacted by this, but immediate family, now the children of the immediate, her nieces and everything. And Peggy's fear that if I'm trying to protect myself, then he might go to my mom because he can't get to me. And, then again, the onus is on the victim of like, well, would I rather him kill me or my mom? Because he's probably going to get to one of us and I'm trying to keep somebody safe. And it shouldn't be like that.
Yeah, and it is a drag on your emotional well-being, your time, your resources. You're now having to pay for a security system you wouldn't already pay for. So you do see that the ripple effect is not just the physical, emotional, and financial toll it takes on the victim, but then also their families. And it's to see the response we're going to see from law enforcement to an insidious crime that is wide-reaching is maddening and frustrating, to say the least.
The family's fears escalated after Peggy's mom received a disturbing package in the mail. It was a large Ziploc bag containing pictures of Peggy, one she had been forced to leave behind when she fled the home she shared with Patrick. Patrick had filled the plastic bag with water, forever ruining the pictures. Most alarming, though, was that the return address on the package was Mark's address, Peggy's boyfriend that Patrick was also stalking, and the postmark was from San Jose, California. Debbie said the family was terrified, realizing that Patrick was honing in on where Peggy was living.
And you see, this is not, I'm going to kill you, but it is tacitly saying, I'm still around thinking about you and I want to destroy you, your face, that feeling of destruction of like her actual visage, but then also writing down Mark's Albuquerque address and having it postmarked from San Jose, which is the nearest airport to where she's living. That's 2 ways to say, no matter what state you're in, I know where you're at.
And the threat of, I'm coming for you.
And I'm getting closer.
Yeah, I'm not afraid to scare your mom, make her upset, any of your family. And the San Jose, seeing that makes
sickening.
my stomach hurt to think how it's like a fucking Lifetime movie. You look down, you're like, oh my God, he's found her. Or at least he's close, he's getting closer at the very least.
At least to the metro area where she's at, which means she's just driving on a highway the wrong day and he might pass her. I mean, that makes you not want to leave your house.
Yeah. It was glaringly apparent that no type of order of protection was going to stop Patrick from terrorizing Peggy and her family. While celebrating Thanksgiving in Ohio, Peggy's sister Debbie, who was visiting at their mother's house with their young daughters, received a heart-dropping phone call from Patrick. Debbie recalled,
he said, I know where she's at, and in 10 minutes, she'll be dead.
A terrified Debbie told the girls and her mom to hide, afraid that Patrick could be near them. Debbie called Albuquerque police to have them go to Mark's house, where Peggy was staying for a brief holiday visit back in New Mexico. Peggy then called the Albuquerque district attorney in charge of her case to add the death threat to her file. When the prosecutor answered Peggy's call, he laughed and said,
Oh, wow, you're still alive?
An angry Peggy replied,
Is it going to take a bullet in my head for you to do anything?
Unfortunately for Peggy, the prosecutor did not inform the court that had issued the protective order about Patrick's most recent threat. He also failed to tell Peggy that she needed to contact them. In a later interview, the prosecutor said that because Patrick threatened her family in Ohio rather than Peggy directly, it didn't count as a violation. However, the judicial officer who granted the order, Loretta Lopez, told reporters after Peggy's death,
It might not have been a charge police would have arrested him for, but it may have been a technical violation such as indirect contact. But we shouldn't focus on woulda, coulda, shoulda. It won't serve anyone any good. The order needs to be used effectively and people need to know what to do. This article in the Albuquerque News Journal within like days of her passing was some of the most buck passing I've ever read in my life. The prosecutor was like, no, it actually wouldn't have counted. And she's like, it would have. And then realized, oh, what have I just said? And then was like, but we shouldn't focus on that. I'm like, because you're liable? You're liable for this woman's murder? Yeah, I think you are. Everyone
saying
is.
the quiet parts out loud.
Yeah.
And when they say it out loud, they realize, oh, yikes. When we say this, it actually, okay, now we get it. Yeah. Any prosecutor that takes this so lightly, I don't care how this was delivered, it's inappropriate, unprofessional, and horrifying to say, oh, wow, you're still alive?
Yeah. And this is in November of 2002. I have some bad news. Some people are still laughing about this in 2023 that are in our law enforcement and judicial system. But you're right. It's extremely unprofessional, but it shows that minimization. And as Debbie called her sister, small but mighty. Peggy was small but mighty and had at least had that oomph to be like, I'm going to fight back on this. Think of the thousands and thousands and thousands of stalking victims that are so defeated. And they're like, well, he laughed at me, so I don't even need to continue on in this. You know, she has that oomph to fight, and not everybody even is blessed with that. And to have the person who you think is about to take your stalker to trial laugh at you like, ugh, I'm gonna have to take this to trial. You're still alive. Go quit your job. You are a sick person.
I hope that they are no longer in that role.
Yeah, and everyone should have been sued. It doesn't bring anyone back, but then you get into the issues of qualified immunity, and are they acting? It's negligent, it's sick. In this case, it's willful. Like, you know that she's in danger, and
she's being threatened actively.
Yes.
Yeah, she's receiving death threats, and you're taking them lightly. It makes no sense, and it's, like you said, just maddening when you see there were so many steps along the way where she was failed. Law enforcement failed her. She was doing everything she should have been doing, reporting everything, and they just didn't give a shit.
Laughed at in her face over the phone. Yeah.
The trial date for Patrick's criminal stalking case continued to be pushed back again and again. First from September to October, then finally to January 24th, 2003. During that time, Patrick had hired a private investigator in New Mexico. That man used legally obtained computer records to find that Peggy was living in Turlock. On January 16, 2003, Patrick flew from New Mexico to the San Jose airport with a handgun and hunting rifle in his checked luggage. He drove a rental car to Turlock. On the street near Peggy's condo, he posed as a private investigator and was able to obtain information from a delivery truck driver as to Peggy's exact location. It was just 6 days before the stalking trial was set to begin.
This makes me incredibly frustrated that a private investigator would not do due diligence on his own client to see that his client is a dangerous person. As Debbie told us in her interview, Patrick didn't even pay this guy. So he's like, I'm not going to give you the exact address, but I'll give you a neighborhood or a town.
Which was enough.
It's enough. And again, that's to me, you are now liable for what happened next. You are all contributorily liable for what's happening. And the fact that the protective order was not filed in the national database, when he goes to check his guns at the airport, nothing pops up. And there's no stopping him or anything like that from traveling across state lines. And then this delivery driver who just got pressured by Patrick's charm. It is, like I said, why unless it is from a agency, sheriff's office, police office, I'm not giving information. And even then I might not, I'm not giving information to anybody. You could tell me you're a private investigator all day long. I don't care. I don't know if that person wants to be found and what you're going to do to him when you find him. So not my business.
He'd also tried to get her address from the moving company, posing as a police officer and calling the moving company and telling the woman, oh, we have some of her stuff still, so I just wanted to get it back to her. And that lady was like, nah, this doesn't sound right. And called Peggy to say, hey, this just happened. And she said, I don't have any missing items. I have a stalker. His name is Patrick Kennedy. So a woman hears that call and is like, oh, huge red flag. This doesn't sound right. Also he was like, when she wouldn't give him the address, he's like, oh, okay, never mind. And Debbie told us in her interview, like, what cop would behave that way? Just give it up at the first sign of but it didn't matter because he got to this delivery driver and charm or just persistence to where
obnoxious.
You're like, I need this. Yeah, obnoxious. Like, I need this guy out of my fucking way. I got stuff to do. But he did the fact dirty. That he
made. Debbie said Patrick had made these business cards, like a fake private investigator business cards. That is the lengths to which he was willing to go to carry this out. I mean, this is
a total persona.
Premeditated.
Yeah, yes, like a character.
All premeditated.
It was his entire life. His existence was just trying to hunt her down and creating this elaborate scheme in order to do so.
It is what the experts say. It's homicide in slow motion. And like we were saying in the last episode, when you go, you have this plan and then what? And for stalkers, the and then what is a blank answer up until they have escalated to this point. And then what is homicide.
Yeah. On a Saturday morning, January 18th, 2003, at her condo complex off Colorado Avenue in Turlock, California, Peggy was getting ready to do laundry and meet her neighbor Rachel for coffee. She put her laundry down on the counter and then headed to the garage, where her worst nightmare came true. Patrick was there, hiding. He chased her through her condo as she tried to run. After catching up to her, he duct taped her mouth and hands, choked her, and beat her with his fist and gun so severely that her blonde hair turned red with blood. Described as small but mighty, Peggy managed to get up and run out of her front door where Rachel was waiting to meet her. The women then fled together to Rachel's apartment. Rachel tried to barricade the door before they ran together to hide in the bedroom closet upstairs. A frantic Peggy called 911 at 9:10 a.m. and explained,
I have a stalker. He's here to kill me. He's already beaten me up and taped me. He's in my house.
When the operator asked who the assailant was, Peggy told them,
Patrick Kennedy. He's beaten me up with a gun. He's trying to break in now.
She then issued a chilling warning.
If you don't get here, he's going to kill both of us.
The 911 call is absolutely heartbreaking. The calm resolution in her voice of this is it is just, it's so sad. I mean, she's very calm. She's very just like
to the point.
She, I mean, she's doing everything she can to maintain. And that probably comes from years of having to do that.
Yeah. That you have that plan in your head, whether it's the initial just anxiety thinking about it over and over, or actually making a plan of what I would do. But you have visualized, I'm sure, and lived this 1,000 times in your head.
Yeah. And like Debbie said in our interview with her, imagine Rachel, who is at the door about to knock, like, hey, you ready to go get coffee? And Peggy comes running out just covered in blood, a huge head wound. And it's like, he's here, he's found me. And they just run into there. Yeah. So now, I'm sure Peggy's distraught that her friend is now being involved.
Yeah. And that's the more onus that happens on stalking victims of, again, well, now you have to keep the people around you safe. What do you say? Like, well, we could go to coffee, but we have to be sure first that my stalker isn't here. I mean, you can't enjoy it's a morning that any of us would want to have on a Saturday morning, getting your chores done, see your buddy, have a kind of a relaxing day. And instead you're on the phone with 911 saying, get here now, or he is going to kill me and my friend.
Yeah. Peggy asked repeatedly how close officers were, explaining that not only was her hair
sopping wet with blood,
but that Patrick had broken into the neighbor's unit despite their best attempts to keep him out. As the 911 operator urged her to stay on the line, Peggy can be heard addressing her stalker.
Patrick, I'm the only one here.
Apparently in an attempt to protect her friend, who remained hidden in the closet. A man's voice can be heard calmly saying,
hang that up.
Peggy told him in a calm, strong voice,
stop it. Please stop it.
She then explained to the operator,
I have to go. He's going to kill me.
The line then went dead. 5 officers were on the scene within 5 minutes. They searched the second apartment where Peggy had been hiding with Rachel. Patrick had shattered Rachel's sliding glass door and headed upstairs, locking himself in the bedroom with Peggy. The SWAT team stood on the outside of the closed bedroom door. Having realized Rachel was hiding in the closet, Patrick made the decision to let her leave. When the door opened for her to exit, Patrick fired at the SWAT team, missing one officer by about 2 feet. I think it's kind of telling in a haunting way that he let Rachel go. I mean, thank God he did. He was only there for Peggy.
Yeah, and it was this end game for him.
Yeah. He knew what he was there to do. I don't think you travel across state lines with 2 guns and have gone to the lengths to find the person you've been looking for this whole time, not knowing like how this is going to end for both of you.
Yeah. And with the duct tape, bringing tape, waiting, hiding, lying in wait, hiding in the garage, waiting for her, things like that tell you he wasn't showing up to talk at all.
No.
And like you said, when I think the shooting at the officers was, he just didn't want them to come in there and interrupt what he had planned out in his head. I don't know that, again, Monday morning quarterback, I think Peggy was saying to them, if you come in here, he will kill me. But it's also very chilling that all this went down with 5 SWAT officers on the other side of the door.
Yeah, it's hard to wrap your head around that something this heinous can happen when the people that are supposed to protect you are just feet away and
in full gear. Yeah,
and that it's somehow when that door opened and Rachel left that they couldn't get a shot off. But I mean, I'm sure they were doing everything they could to, keep Peggy safe and take them both alive, but it's just not how it worked out.
Yeah, and the domestic violence calls are some of the most dangerous calls for police officers, and that is evidenced here. I mean, he was laser focused on her, but was still willing to put them in danger too.
Yeah. When the door closed again, officers tried addressing Patrick and reasoning with him. He made no response and remained laser focused on Peggy, who cowered underneath him as he held a gun to her head. On the other side of the door, officers heard Peggy's voice. She told them that Patrick had a gun to her head, and if they entered, he would kill her. The police officer said,
"Let's not talk about that, Peggy. Let's talk about your family."
In a calm voice, Peggy asked the police to do 3 things.
Tell my mother that I love her. Tell my niece that she'll have a guardian angel watching over her in heaven. And tell my sister, who's pregnant, to name her baby after me.
Police then heard 2 shots from behind the door. Patrick shot Peggy in the back of the head before turning the gun on himself. She was 32 years old. It's probably another, she knew in those moments, like she'd already planned out what she kind of wanted her last wishes to be.
Which is such a heinous thing to have to plan out in advance.
Yeah.
To have the fact that you have that resolute resolve of this is happening and at least I can deliver this message to my family. Mm-hmm. And the helplessness of those officers, I'm sure, on the other side, because you have the victim saying, if you come in here, he'll kill me. And it's like, if you don't come in here, he'll kill me. If you arrest him and put him in jail and he gets out of jail, he might kill me. And that just shows this kind of persistence until this homicide in slow motion. And the thing about it is this was the natural conclusion of the lack of action on the part of so many people, despite the perfect action on Peggy's behalf.
Right.
On her part, she did literally everything right, but not having the support system and the around her. It's exactly what, is it going to take a bullet in my head for you to do something?
Yeah.
And that prosecutor that laughed, I really hope he rethought all that. I mean, he was trying to cover his ass in articles afterwards, so I don't know that it affected him too much.
Yeah, for the cop to say, let's not talk about that, it almost makes me think that they knew how this was going to end. Unfortunately, they, if they went in, they knew he was going to shoot her, and to shoot through the door and not, you're just blindly shooting. You could hurt her. Mm-hmm. Depending on where they were positioned in the room. Mm-hmm. But to be on the other side as the SWAT officers and think, I don't think we can save this person, is just a horror that I can't imagine. And again, that ripple effect of these men think about this all the time too. Mm-hmm. Even though that's their job to be there, that somebody is in such distress, their life is literally about to be over and you can't do anything, and your job is to help them, and you feel powerless.
Yeah, and I'm sure, through your training, if you have a hostage situation, a domestic violence hostage situation, and the assailant is non-responsive and the victim is describing that he is in a kill position. I mean, I'm sure that it's, whatever is in their training, but at least trying to comfort her at the end of let's talk about your family, or try to, distract from it.
Yeah.
It's not an easy position.
The 911 call, and I don't often listen to 911 calls, but I did listen to this one. And the resolute when she says, I have to go, he's going to kill me, is just so she knows, and that fear of, you're it's finally happening. This is how it's going to end. And you can't call anyone. You don't it just haunts me to think of someone knowing that they're about to die.
Yeah, you're in the slow motion homicide, and then it's happening now. Your brain almost goes into kind of we joke that whenever we're in a crazy situation, you become very when we were in my car and there was an accident happening, you were hit your brakes, not too fast, move to the next lane over, that. She's been traumatized so much that the response in the actual heightened moment is get Rachel out, get this message to my family. And it's so unfair that not only was her life taken quite literally, but the time preceding up to that, so much of her life was eaten up and taken. that she had to have this, like that she was ready to kind of shift into this, like the 911 call is haunting when she says that of like, I've got to go. He's going to kill me now. It's not like, oh my God, he's going to kill me now. It's like, well, this is happening now.
It's been decided. And I think, like, to your point of everything leading up to this, she knows that, like, this isn't a threat. Like, he's there to finish this once and for all. And I wonder when she said he's going to kill us both, if she was talking about Rachel or her and himself. Because, I mean, we don't know any type of conversation that transpired between them. You do hear him say, and it's so chilling on that 911 call in the background, just to hear him go, hang that up. Like, you're not getting out of this, and also just the calmness in his voice too. But also this is happening. We're not going to keep going back and forth. Like, when he shows up and you've fled the state and he shows up hiding in your garage, it reminds me of this movie that I can't, was Gwyneth Paltrow in it? And she like moves and her stalker finds her and she pretends to be pregnant and it's a whole thing. But I just keep thinking of that scene where he finds her and she's like, this is it. I mean, if he's finally found me, and this is what we were all kind of hoping never happened, but we're preparing for. It's a week before the trial. He's not going to trial.
Yeah. And that feeling that Debbie said they all kind of had of like, well, okay, it's only a few more days and then he'll be in jail and then we can finally breathe a sigh of relief for a minute, and not even knowing that he was counting those days down of like, I'm not going to jail. No. I'm not going to trial. I won't be in that courtroom.
None of us are going to trial.
No.
Yeah.
And wanting to control it. But it's like we talked about the Freaky Friday story, one of them that a person sent in about their mom being stalked, of like racing down the road in this like car chase scenario where you really are living a true life horror film, that you have this person lying in wait, tying you up, smashing through a glass door that is like this unstoppable beast that without systems like the entire criminal justice system, they're allowed to do essentially allowed to do things like that. The fact that he got on a plane with a gun, to me, is
2 guns.
Mind-boggling. Yeah. A rifle and a handgun.
And not to mention all of the things he's done to Peggy that she's filed. But he had an ex-wife that she filed 7 different charges against him, including, and Debbie said they didn't even find this out until after Peggy had been killed, but about any of the charges against him, which that's also mind-boggling that somehow that wasn't revealed to her from some law enforcement agent or a prosecutor or somebody. Like, how did nobody know that? But the last one that was filed, on the back he wrote, he is stalking me, and underlined stalking. His ex-wife did, and said he is not going to be happy until he's either killed me or our young daughter. So he had a predilection for decades that this is how he treated women in relationships.
As owning, possessing.
Yeah, and people aren't sharing information across state lines, or the database, things don't get entered, and things that everyone should be aware of, nobody knows about. And if they had, they would have been like, or maybe, I don't know, maybe not, but at least Peggy could have been more informed, and her family, hopefully law enforcement would have done something, but I don't know. I can't say that would have changed anything for them, sadly.
No, but it shows you the need for having comprehensive reporting databases for people who engage in domestic violence, because the statistics are so correlated from stalking to femicide, and especially intimate partner stalking, domestic violence to eventual homicide. I mean, it's so correlated that the people that engage in this type of behavior should be banned from having guns for like decades at a time. Like, you get to prove with your good behavior why you think you deserve this privilege of having a gun, because it is such, and the statistics of like when there's a gun involved, that it's so greater. So that's why I think her story is so important.
In Ohio later that night, Peggy's sister Debbie got the worst news of her life. The doorbell rang. And her first fear was Patrick may be on the other side. When she looked through and saw police officers were waiting, her heart sunk. She already knew. After opening the door, Debbie's first words to them were,
"Just tell me, did Patrick Kennedy kill my sister?"
The answer was sadly yes. Debbie later told interviewers that she just knew that her sister was gone.
"I wasn't surprised that this is how the road ended for her, since nobody would do anything to protect her."
Peggy's friend Marie in New Mexico, likewise, was prepared for the worst. Having seen firsthand how badly her friend had been stalked, when she received a call from Debbie, Marie told interviewers,
"I knew something had happened. I remember just screaming and crying. It's like, why kill her? But I think even in the end, he thought she belonged to him. And if he couldn't have her, no one could."
I agree with that. And I also agree with Debbie that, they were all hoping that it wouldn't end like this. But at the same time, when you see two cops at your door, you're like,
Late at night.
I'm horrified and saddened beyond belief. But unfortunately, I'm not that surprised because nobody did anything to help her.
Yeah, it's that slow motion. It's like we've all been screaming. I literally just called like a month and a half ago, called Albuquerque police out because he threatened us while on a protective order and nobody did anything. And
Saying,
then he was,
I know where she is. She's going to be dead in 10 minutes. And was he talking about he knew she was at Mark's house in Albuquerque, or was he talking about I know where she lives in Turlock? It doesn't really matter because he showed and was showing even before he killed her that he had every intent to kill her.
Yeah, and telling her that on the phone and the threats and showing her that he knew where she was and was getting closer. So to see that, and I think, Marie is absolutely right that it's this idea of possession, control, and that's the ultimate control.
Yeah, I think as far as, the and then what, I think the then what for people like him is then we both die.
Yeah.
If you don't want to come back to me, then I'm going to kill you and I'm going to kill myself. And that's how it's all going to end.
Yeah. And I decide when we do this. I decide when it all happens. It's that control element. And when you are doing all this completely unfettered by like any criminal repercussions, why wouldn't you think that you could do that?
Yeah. When Peggy's boyfriend Mark was notified, he recalled to interviewers for Real Life, Real Crime how he punched a hole through the wall before collapsing and crying out over and over that he was sorry. Mark told interviewers,
"At that point, you just feel I failed her, that the whole system failed her. You just feel powerless."
In an interview with the Albuquerque Journal, Mark recalled how hard they had fought to protect Peggy and how no one would help them.
"We reported 8 to 10 incidents and made literally hundreds of follow-up calls to authorities. No one ever followed up, though. I don't understand."
No one understands.
Yeah,
there's no understanding this. They all fucked up, and her blood is literally on their hands.
On all of their hands, yeah. And that's in that Albuquerque Journal article. It says, well, local law enforcement said they did do things, and it was not at all true. I mean, it was that cat covering up shit on a tile floor of like, well, we really shouldn't talk about couldas, wouldas, shouldas. It's like a woman is dead because of your failure to respond.
Yeah.
And and as a judge, that judicial officer who's kind of said, oh, woulda, coulda, shoulda, at the bench, I think it is incumbent upon jurists to go, before I grant this protective order, I need you to know X, Y, and Z about this. And then also, just so you know, this covers this behavior. These are how you contact and who you should contact. And you just see like, what else are you supposed to do in this situation? I mean, with Mark, he did everything he could, moving houses, trying to take care of her, having her move while he stayed behind, all of that, supporting her every single step of the way. And you're just like, what else could I have done?
But it's all stuff they're having to do because no one is helping them. And there's not enough advocacy from law enforcement for victims of like, a hand-holding process of like, someone that knows what you got to do, like a social worker, essentially of like
victim advocate.
Yeah. That this is what you got to do. Let's get a plan in place. I mean, it shouldn't be up to you to be like, okay, well, I guess I got to Google how to keep myself safe from my stalker. You know, I mean, it shouldn't be up to you to have to do that. The laws should be in place to protect the victim, not make it easier for this stalker to find her.
Yeah, and you're right. And I think that's where Spark comes in with their training. And they train not only prosecutors, but they'll train like court staff, judges, like individualized trainings to say, like, here's how a stalking case is going to be presented to you. And here is where you can step in and find your part to play. It's like any problem in society at all. It's like no one person's going to solve everything. You have to find where can you reach and what can you do to affect change from your limited perspective, position, whatever. And that training to know specifically, hey, if you're a court clerk, make sure you tell the victim, yo, you need to get this many copies of it. Make sure you give it to this many places, and just say you can make a difference in these cases so that we don't see so many people going, I don't know, it was kind of in the paperwork, so I guess she should have read it. It's like, I'm sorry, she can't read. She has 16 binders full of stuff. Like, she's been reading. Okay, also, somebody needs to step up.
She's trying not to get killed. Her mind's kind of, filled with she's busy. So how about you, who this is your job and you've been trained on what to do, help somebody out. Everyone needs sensitivity training, victim training, victim-centered training in all of these positions, to where a different perspective that maybe they haven't heard before is shown to them, like agencies like Spark that, go in and show like real life people speaking to them of, this happened to me. Like, now look me in the face and tell me, like, you don't think I should have been helped? Like, really putting a face with name and framing it in a way of like, we should all be more concerned about this. It's not something that we should, it's 2024 now, which still doesn't fucking matter. But even back then, like, women, listen to women and believe them. Don't think that they are being dramatic or, they're blowing things out of proportion. Or that's, well, I don't want to get involved. That's between them. No, she was begging for someone to get involved. So this didn't happen. Everyone that loved her was begging for somebody to get involved.
Yeah. And I'm pleased to see that the training for not just criminal law enforcement, but also civil legal aid. When I worked at Legal Aid, a lot of our training and community outreach was to create a victim-centered response and a multidisciplinary approach. So you do have social workers that can maybe help you find new housing and can help you access victims' compensation funds so you can pay for that new housing. I think, here's how you change your address in a way that keeps it private. And here's a civil attorney that may be able to help you sue for whatever he's, if any other way that you might want to address it. And then also that trauma-informed advocacy where you are not re-traumatizing the victim. So I am glad to see not just Spark, but other organizations too. Some of the ones, I think it was Center for Counsel too. We talked to the folks from Hero Maker was one of their organizations where they go in and train law enforcement of like mindfulness and taking them out, this kind of de-escalation, victim advocacy. So I like that we are now applying what we know is effective in like cases of child abuse, where you have these multidisciplinary centers. And now, you apply it to the abuse of seniors, domestic violence victims, people who have endured stalking. And it's kind of like, well, it seems like all victims of crime would benefit from this.
Yeah, it is bizarre how there's almost a hierarchy or a pecking order of what pulls at people's heartstrings. And children are at the top. So certainly those laws are going to, it's like, well, of course we need to protect children. And of course we do. But those same laws, it shouldn't be like when that child grows up and now they're a 30-year-old woman. Now you're kind of in the age where like, we're not as concerned. We don't care as much. So you got to figure that out on your own. And then you get to be where you're 80. And then again, it's like, oh, well, now we care again because this is an old woman and she can't take care of herself. Care about them the whole time.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I love to see specialized organizations like Spark that is focused only on stalking, because we also have RAIN that's focused on sexual assault. We have domestic violence organizations. And that's when I did that fellowship, it was like I worked with older adults, but there were some people that worked with the unhoused population or people, refugee communities, things like that, where I can't solve every problem problem all the time, but this very specialized training, I can help at least say, here's where you can fit into this. I know that stalking is not your number one concern all the time, but as a judicial officer, this may be some things that you can look out for.
And
so
it all intertwines and overlaps.
Yeah.
Like if you have domestic violence, there's a good chance stalking is involved. It's people escalate. So it's often the first sign that something's going on.
Absolutely.
In an interview at the time, Debbie told the Modesto Bee,
Patrick had one mission and one mission only, that if he couldn't have my sister, no one would have her.
Later, Patrick's father, Royce Kennedy, told reporters that he was sorry for the Klinke family and that Patrick just
snapped.
Detective Tony Silva called it
a very depressing case.
Peggy's friend Lisa Landolfo told the Modesto Bee,
this has been their worst fear and mine for some time now, and we're all just devastated.
Well, Royce, I don't think Patrick just snapped. I think he had been like this for quite some time. And your own son said that you probably would have been the target instead of Peggy.
Yeah. And it's, to me, the least you could do would have been to offer the proper respect to the situation and either shut the fuck up or say, I'm devastated, take a page out of the parents of a mass shooter kind of playbook of like, I am devastated that my child has created this destruction and there's no words I have, but to be like, well, listen, he just snapped. Okay. And it's like a person who has spent almost every one of his waking hours for the past several years making this woman's life a living hell. And before that, spent many years making his ex-wife and young daughter's life a living hell. And I'm sure he wasn't just a peach before that.
No.
I don't think that's a snap, my dude. That is a person who has been enabled by their family not to take responsibility for their actions and to write it off as just a little mental health snap. And that's Sparks literature says the vast majority of stalkers do not have significant mental health diagnoses. It is not, oh, well, this is just a thing that, people that they've gone off the deep end and snapped and have done it. No, there are people who engage as a behavior that has not been trained out of them by
they think
either.
It's okay. They think that it's their right. I mean, it's like incels. Like it's their right that they own this woman and she owes them something because of no reason, just some fucked up thing in their head. It's he had been this way for a long time.
Decades.
Yeah.
So to say it was snapped, I found this really offensive.
Yeah, it's minimizing it once again.
Yeah, incredibly. Sinisterhood will be right back.
You've probably heard about microdosing. It's all the rage. But if not, just know that all sorts of people are microdosing daily to feel healthier and perform better.
Microdose gummies deliver perfect entry-level doses of THC that help you feel just the right amount of good. And what are we talking about when we're talking about the right amount of good? It's that if you're going to go for a walk and you want to be able to notice the trees, be present, not be thinking about your work emails, not checking your phone, just vibing and listening directly to your podcast, to your audio book, to some nice music, or just the sounds of nature. When I microdose and do my walks, game changer.
I like to call it being in the zone where everything is just clicking and you just feel like you're performing your absolute best,
Absolutely. Get you creative, get you working out, get you spicy, whatever you want.
Whatever you want. Get 30% off your first order plus free shipping today at microdose.com, promo code CREEPY. It's available nationwide.
That's microdose.com, promo code CREEPY for 30% off and free shipping. Microdose.com, promo code CREEPY. Sinisterhood will be right back.
Although she was devastated by what happened to her sister, Debbie realized early on in her grief.
I decided, you know what? Knowing Peggy's personality, Peggy would have been on a cell phone at my funeral trying to take action, trying to make something good come out of something so tragic.
In the days following her sister's murder, Debbie happened to turn on the Today Show as a segment on stalking aired. She searched online and contacted the Stalking Resource Center, now known as the Stalking Prevention Awareness and Resource Center, or SPARC. Debbie wrote an email to the center explaining that she wanted to share Peggy's story in a way that would help law enforcement officials across the country address stalking in a more serious and effective way. It's the love of a sister. And,
Yeah.
like, I'm not going to let her death be in vain. I'm going to turn this into a way to help other people. And she has. I mean, Debbie and Dana and Spark have helped countless people.
It's an incredible thing to watch that in that, or even in those early moments of grief of like, I'm going to turn it this way. And I loved when we asked her kind of like, if somebody was in your position and she's like, there's no right way to grieve. And just because you've had something heinous happen to you and you don't go on a lecture circuit and become a speaker, that's okay. That is just how she's chosen to honor. And just, man, Googling her name, the amount of articles that come up of different places she's gone on to speak at, whether it's, on Capitol Hill to try to get laws passed, all the way down to, speaking at high schools, colleges, whatever. There is nothing more effective than, like you said, putting a face to that action and saying this is not a tag on crime. This is a thing that needs to be addressed in and of itself.
Mm-hmm. Having someone speak to you just about stalking in general is going to be informative and might hit home, but having the sister of a stalking victim who was brutally murdered stand in front of you and share her story and her family's story and what that was like. If you don't walk away from that changed and wanting to do something to enact change, there's something deeply wrong with you.
Yeah, I'm concerned.
Yeah.
No, I think it's way, way, way more impactful than, and I think it is because people are like, oh, we're going to get a lecture versus I'm going to give you the respect of my attention to honor your story and your sister's story. And because of that, I think the lessons hit a lot harder.
Mm-hmm. Even though there were laws against stalking on the books in both California and New Mexico at the time of Peggy's murder, they were ineffective as the system failed to enforce them in an urgent manner. Stalking had only been recognized as a crime 13 years earlier. The first stalking law in the country was passed in 1990 after actress Rebecca Schaefer was killed by an obsessed fan, before 5 other women in Southern California were stalked and murdered by their intimate partners. The state took action in response, passing a law that legislators described
It criminalizes the repeated harassment or following of another person in conjunction with a threat, and California is enforcing the law aggressively.
Soon, 30 more states followed suit, sadly in each case spurred to action by the murder of a woman by her stalker. Criminal laws usually focus on a single act, like assault or murder, while stalking laws focus on a course of conduct in an effort to prevent stalkers from claiming their gestures are innocent. Similar to criminal charges of conspiracy, prosecutors must show an ongoing course of conduct to charge a stalker. Even where a prosecutor is unable to prove a course of conduct, stalking is often comprised of multiple behaviors that are crimes on their own. In that case, a prosecutor can and should address the criminal behavior, whether it is via threats, harassment, computer fraud, invasion of privacy, or similar acts. If the stalker uses a third party, like a friend or a private investigator, the stalker can still be charged under traditional complicity or conspiracy theories.
And the training from Spark is excellent for prosecutors on deciding from a strategic perspective whether you have sufficient evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt all the elements of stalking, where you might have them dead to rights, red-handed on, hacking into somebody's email or Facebook or breaking into their house and taking things or damaging their property, where all of those underlying behaviors are comprising, they make up this whole stalking case. But if you, for some reason, maybe you can't quite prove intent, which we'll get to here in a minute. If you can't quite do that, it's not like the prosecutor goes, well, can't prove a stalking case. Sorry. They really urge, like, let's find creative ways to hold these people to account so they have some charge on their record at least. And maybe you can kind of start flagging them so they're not able to, travel across state lines with guns.
It reminds me of the recent true crime headlines where we discussed the man that attacked the judge while he was being sentenced, and then the later judge, when he was being sentenced for those crimes, I mean, the laundry list of things that they were able to, or charged, come up with, because the judge was one of their own and they don't take kindly to that. So we see that there are situations where you can pull out 14 charges under one act. So they just stack up and they get the biggest penalty possible. So why doesn't that happen for everyone?
Yeah, for cases like this. And that's a good question of, when you can compound charges, or you say this is I was reading through a ton of case law on this one. And, there's instances where, a stalker would send one message in the morning, one message in the afternoon, and one message in the evening, and was on a protective order. And a really aggressive prosecutor said, that's 3 violations of the protective order. And he goes, well, I sent all 3 messages in one day. That's really only one. And they said, nope, you had plenty of time. You were at a fork in a road where you could choose to continue to contact this person who's blocked you and told you to stop, or to say, you know what, I'm under a protective order, I have to stop. And you chose 3 separate times. It was like 3 or 4 hours in between. And so the argument was like, oh, it was one long course of conduct. And fighting to the appellate level and having the state's office go, nah, we're not letting this person off, and go, no, you were terrorizing. And that was a series of really scary, threatening messages, because the woman had patio furniture that they had purchased as a couple. They had gotten divorced, and her ex-husband was stalking her. And she had posted a photo on social media sitting on this patio furniture, and it was like, oh, I see what you're doing. Da, 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 da. So it's again showing they know where you are, what you're sitting on, who you're with, and arguing, well, those weren't threatening messages. And it's like, yes, they were. So there are opportunities that if you want to be, and I think from a broad-based like crime prevention perspective, given the escalation of these actors to homicide eventually, and also even if they don't kill this victim that they're stalking, when they move on to someone else, absolutely as hard of a prosecution as possible to go, we don't do that in this jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. And we don't take it lightly.
And like Dana said, oftentimes the only reason a stalker stops stalking a victim is because they move on to another victim.
To find somebody else.
So it's not, and she also said that behavior doesn't just stop.
No.
You don't just like stalk someone and then like that's the only time you ever do it. I mean, once you've gone down that road, it says a lot about what you're capable of and like how just you work.
Yeah, how they function, for sure.
These laws help, but the specific language used in the laws has proven to be a tricky thing to get right. In some instances, the laws required a threat, something stalkers could inform themselves about and maneuver around. While some actions by stalkers were clearly illegal, death threats, phone harassment, trespassing, and property damage, scholars argued that something simple like leaving roses on a doorstep is a constitutionally protected action. That means the laws have to be drafted broadly enough to cover the many behaviors in which stalkers engage. But like all laws, they also have to withstand challenges to their constitutionality. What seems like a simple gesture can often indicate something deadly when it is part of a course of conduct by the stalkers. Those seemingly simple gestures often escalate, with one study showing 76% of female victims of intimate partner homicide had been stalked by their killers. 89% of those homicide victims who had previously been abused by their partners had also been stalked during the year preceding their deaths. Still, convicted stalkers often use the First Amendment as grounds for an appeal in their cases. These decisions leave stalking victims vulnerable, while legislatures must redraft laws and law enforcement must find other avenues to protect victims. Even 33 years after the first stalking law was passed, those challenges continue. In 2023, the conviction of a man for stalking a Colorado musician was overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court. Billy Ray Counterman was sentenced to 4.5 years in prison for stalking Denver-based country musician Coles Whalen with thousands of Facebook messages indicating he knew where she lived, what car she drove, and who she was spending time with. He described tapped phone lines and told her in one post,
"I'm currently unsupervised. I know, it freaks me out too, but the possibilities are endless."
She blocked him again and again, but each time he would create a new account and contact her again. The stalking forced her to cancel appearances, begin carrying a gun, and even move out of state. Whalen got a protective order, and Counterman was convicted of stalking in 2021. He appealed his case on First Amendment grounds all the way to the Supreme Court. In 2023, the High Court overturned Counterman's conviction and restarted the trial process at the state level. In a majority opinion written by Justice Kagan, the court held that a stalking conviction cannot stand without proof that the actor demonstrated a subjective, conscious disregard of a substantial and unjustified risk that his repeated, objectively terrifying communications would cause serious emotional distress.
Now, let's all just brace ourselves for the breakdown of this. So the TLDR is this person was a musician, Coles Whalen, and on Facebook, she started getting messages from a person who's she didn't know who they were, and escalated to, was that you in the white Jeep? Very specific. Mm-hmm. Oh, who are you with at coffee? Hey, he says, I've had tapped phone lines before. What do you fear? So have you tapped my phone lines now? Mm-hmm. Thousands of messages. And every time she blocked him, it'd be someone new. And when she finally figured out that he had been, that's going to shock you. Your jaw's going to be on the floor. He had been arrested for threatening women with bodily harm before, including threats to, quote, put your fucking head on the sidewalk and bash it in, and, quote, rip your throat out on sight. She contacted law enforcement, got a protective order. So that's more than a lot of stalking victims even get. A protective order, much less. He's actually actively charged with stalking under the Colorado statute. Then he appeals it on First Amendment grounds. And if you ever wanted to get your heart, you need to get your blood pressure up really high, like a cartoon where your face turns all red and then you blow your top.
Pop out of your head.
Yeah. I was screaming in my car listening to the oral arguments in this case because Chief Justice Roberts, man, he's got a tight 5 on how funny stalking is. And if you got to listen to the Counterman oral arguments, he goes, are you kidding me? One of the messages Billy Ray Counterman sent was, staying in cyber life is going to kill you. Come out for coffee. You have my number. He also would say, like, I'm going to the store, babe. Do you need anything? It just shows that this person is like, does not have a grip of reality.
They're
and
unhinged.
You blocked him.
No, and
you blocked
they
him.
Clearly like are following her. They know where she is. They know who she's spending time with. It's terrifying.
This lineup of dumb bitches in black robes, which is what I'm calling the Supreme Court, Chief Justice Roberts is like, staying in cyber life's going to kill you. Well, I can't promise I haven't said something like that. And the gallery laughs. And he's
what
like,
does that even mean?
I guess he's like, these kids these days need to get off the internet. And he's like,
this ain't the time. If you're trying to work out material, go find an open mic. This is a woman's life on the line.
Yes, it is. Can you imagine to have the highest court in the land, the chief justice of the highest court in the land, repeating your stalker's messages and being like, can you guys believe this one? He also is like, come out for coffee. In what world could that ever possibly be threatening? I'm sorry. Well, how about if it's a person you blocked 16 times and they sent you 1,000 messages over the course of several months?
A man that told another woman he was going to rip her throat out on sight or bash her head into a curb.
Yes, somebody that's already been arrested for this before. But don't worry, Billy Ray's attorney, John Elwood, he got into it and he was like, my mother would routinely tell me to drop dead as a child, but, I was never in fear of that. The trivializing of this.
The audacity of men to act like they fucking have a clue.
No clue.
When it comes to stuff like this. And I will say that's not all men, because 1 in 6 men will be stalked at some point in their lives. So it's not 1 in 3 women. So it's, it does happen. But you see all of these men just minimizing it and trying to relate it back to something your mom...
hilarious
going,
that
like,
happened.
Drop dead. I mean, that's like, oh, shut up. I'm going to kill you if you say something like that. That's 100% different and in a different tone, context, everything than a man that has repeatedly shown he is not going to take no for an answer from this woman that he has never even met, but he thinks they're in a relationship. You fucking moron. You fucking idiots. Somebody get a gavel and just smack them all over the head with it and knock some sense into them.
Yeah, and that Chief Justice Roberts conveniently left out those were one of thousands of messages and was like, come out for coffee. That's like a nice thing. What are you going to punish? Cancel culture is going to punish everyone.
Why don't you just do it? And then maybe he'd stop if you just went.
Come on, he might be a good date. But don't worry, it's not just the men. Justice Amy Coney Barrett, she's like,
this is why people hate America.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. They're a big part of it. She's like, what if a college professor were to give a lecture about just how vicious it was to be in the Jim Crow South and puts up behind them on a screen a picture of a burning cross and reads aloud some threats of lynching that were made at the time? And Black students sitting in the classroom, they interpret this lecture as a physical threat because they don't understand it. I'm gonna let that fart of an idea hang in the air.
One of those is you're describing a college class that people have signed up for to learn the history of something.
In context.
Yes. Another is a situation where the person did not ask for any of bitch, it's not even apples.
This is an Arby's.
This is like apples and a Toyota Camry. We're not even in the same fucking universe of what you're talking about.
She went off on this and I was like, did the audio glitch? Is this a different case?
No, she's just that stupid.
And they take it, and the idea, especially Barrett, Gorsuch, and Thomas, we're about to get to you, Thomas, but old Gorsuch pipes up and he's like, yeah, if you're a professor, you got to give trigger warnings nowadays. What do we do in a world in which reasonable people deem things harmful, hurtful, or threatening, and we're going to hold people liable willy-nilly for that? Because the issue here is that Billy Ray Counterman's actions were held to a standard of a reasonable person, which a mens rea standard, that's the lowest one. So it goes the lowest one is reasonable person, negligence, then reckless, then knowing, and then intentional. And so they were kind of what if someone doesn't even intend it? Reasonable people nowadays aren't even reasonable. Professor Mary Ann Franks of George Washington Law School, I was listening to an interview and she goes, it sort of delves into a kids these days kind of an argument. Mm-hmm. And Gorsuch is people aren't reasonable anymore.
You bunch of snowflakes. Why don't you toughen up? None of this is threatening. Just chill out.
Yeah. And that's when Justice Thomas pipes in, the audacity of that man to speak ever, given how fucking corrupt he is. He goes,
the fact that he's still even around is so heinous and unbelievable.
Oh, it's absolutely batshit. The fact that people that he has ruled in their favor paid for his kids' tuition, paid for him to go on trips, paid his wife, and literally wrote in an email, but, make sure she's not on the books because we'll get in trouble for this. And he has purposefully not disclosed stuff. And the fact that it took them to just now come up with a non-binding sort of ethical thing. But Justice Thomas is we live in a time when everything is hypersensitive. Everybody's hypersensitive about everything nowadays.
We should be able to tell people their pubic hair on a Diet Coke can, and everybody should be okay with that.
Speaking of, yes, hypersensitive, when that happened, he's like, this is a high-tech lynching. I'm sorry, you being credibly accused of sexual assault, not to mention if we're trying to talk about...
everybody laughing it off and it becoming a punchline on SNL, just like the same with the Menendez brothers. It was all during that same timeline.
Yes, and if you want to talk about hypersensitive, why don't you call your buddy Brett, who literally sobbed and was like, I like beer, okay? In his confirmation hearings. And anyway, and all of them, Justice Alito made a comment you can't talk about our ethics. It's one thing if you want to disagree with our opinions, but it's over the line. These bitches are the most hypersensitive when they need to be hypersensitive, fucking ethical issues, but they're not. So to hear this obscene amount of, it was completely missing the mark, missing the other thing that I'm really sad about too, because nobody's innocent here, because as they laughed at this, Kagan didn't say nothing, Justice Jackson didn't say nothing, Justice Sotomayor didn't say nothing. You have to speak up when you hear this happening actively right next to you, that a victim is being laughed at. And I think it was in the Amicus podcast, they brought up an old case where a young woman had been strip searched and the court had laughed at her. So, and in that case, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was
That's what I was just about to say.
Visibly
RBG, we need you back.
Or, somebody with a backbone like that. But the court really, the kind of issue with this is that Counterman argued to get away from the obscenity of it was just so offensive, this laughing at a stalking victim after she had been through so much. And Billy Ray Counterman by then had pretty much served his sentence. So that's even more horrifying. And to hear that he is a repeated stalker, like they often are, but they argued that it cannot be criminally prohibited unless the government can prove that the stalker intended to terrify their victim or kind of knew their actions were reasonably likely to terrify their victim and did.
That's subjective. How do you know the mental state? That becomes a he said, she said thing. He can be like, I didn't know. I didn't think that was, I was asking her for coffee.
And that's the problem too, is the more, as Professor Franks was like, the more delusional the stalker, the more dangerous this can become. The state of Colorado argued, our statute says we just have to prove that the stalking would be terrifying to a reasonable person in light of all the circumstances. And they were sort of supported by stalking experts, DV experts, while Counterman was supported by the ACLU, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, FIRE, which is a civil liberties First Amendment organization. So I can see where this case to me is not the one. And there was a previous case in 2015 where it also involves stalking and harassment. That guy, they did not address the First Amendment issues in his case. It did go all the way to the Supreme Court. His conviction was overturned. He was let out. And I'm going to shock you. You better hold on to your britches. Did you know he did it again? He immediately started stalking the prosecutor, his ex-wife, his ex-girlfriend. Yeah.
Taylor Swift stalker was just let out of jail and he's already been arrested.
Yes, it's almost like they won't stop. Yeah, that guy that got went to the Supreme Court, his conviction was overturned, and he started posting, "I am a First Amendment hero. You're welcome. I am a hero for free speech everywhere." Immediately started stalking again. Everywhere. Good news is he's back in jail for 12 years. So the court basically said with Counterman, it has to at least be a recklessness standard. But yeah, you see these stalkers, they just come out and do it again. So the Counterman case, the Supreme Court said kind of speech is not completely free. If the government is going to at all encroach on free speech, like it does with defamation, words that incite a riot, things like that, there has to be some kind of standard. And the very minimum standard is recklessness. So a lot of articles at the time kind of said the Supreme Court just made stalking legal, and it made a really nasty decision, I think, and it kind of made certain stalking laws weaker. But Spark really warned against a kind of a defeatist attitude when discussing this case, because you don't want to say the headline is the Supreme Court made stalking legal. A stalker reads only the headline and is like, cool. And even if it isn't truly legal, they have now engaged in something. Counterman only addresses speech-based stalking. So he never followed her, left flowers, went to her house, any of that. So in cases of speech-based stalking, prosecutors in every state just have to make sure that they establish that the perpetrator had some understanding that their speech might be viewed as threatening. The majority of U.S. states and jurisdictions, their statutes already include that. The Colorado statute just included a little bit lower mens rea of the negligence, kind of more objective. And the recklessness standard, Sparks training materials was great and said, like, you can prove that recklessness by, the stalker tried to hide their identity by getting new online accounts. So like you obviously knew that she was feeling threatened because she's not going to answer messages from you. So you made a fake account.
Or at least at the very least, she didn't want to talk to you. And get a fucking clue that she's not interested.
If somebody blocks you and you continue to message them, you should be aware that your actions are reasonably likely to threaten that person. And it actually did threaten them. And, they said continuing behavior after not being a victim, telling them outright, please stop contacting me. You are frightening me. Block after that and not engaging any further, then I think, at least according to Spark, they kind of said prosecutors should be able to use that information, and stalking statutes that don't currently include at least that next level of mens rea, because it doesn't have to be all the way up to intentional or even down to knowing. It just has to be that they were reckless and they disregarded, like, my actions and behavior are going to make that person feel threatened. And like they said, the vast majority of stalkers don't have significant mental health diagnoses, but even when offenders do, prosecutors can still prove recklessness, intent, whatever, by that same thing, consciousness of guilt. They may have a mental health diagnosis, but they still understand right from wrong. They still had that branch in behavior. You could either continue messaging after she blocked you or not. You chose to continue, and you knew she had blocked you. Therefore, and you should know that this should be threatening for her, because people don't block people, unless they have a reason.
Exactly.
So, it addresses the type of language called true threat language that the First Amendment, because true threats, we don't want people to be making those willy-nilly. But I think the complete buffoonery of the fucking oral arguments that turned into like snowflake cancel culture / also just Chief John Roberts headline zanies. Like, it was the most I mean, it's just like, take this fucking seriously, man.
Yeah.
People get killed. It is called fucking homicide in slow motion for a reason. And to just be like, some lady got a text message and got her panties in a twist. It's like, this isn't a joke, man. You should be embarrassed and you owe her an apology. You owe all stalking victims an apology.
Every time I hear something like that, I want to ask that person, what if this was your daughter? Or what if this was your mom or your sister? Like, would you have the same callous, just dismissive approach?
LOL.
And and it's usually, no, of course, until you're put in that position, you can't really say. If they are put in that position, then you see, oh, all of a sudden now it matters because it affected me. Well, try and think of it like that all the time. You're there not just to serve and protect or uphold the law when it benefits you. It's supposed to be for everybody.
And you're supposed to consider those points of view. And I think that's what this case massively misses, because for all her great writing, Justice Kagan's opinion really goes through, like, we have to be concerned about the chilling effect on speech. And that's any First Amendment case. You kind of want to weigh and balance when the government's going to step in and say you can't speak. You don't want to, if you have a political speaker that says we need to go to the Supreme Court and whack them on their heads with their gavel and tell them, well, you're really not going to go to the Supreme Court. We're comedians. It's obviously not, they don't let you in anyway, whatever. You have your gavels and you have your gavels and you use them for double banging during Judge Christie only. They are not to be used for whacking Supreme Court justices, even those that deserve it. But the idea that because the true threat standard is recklessness, or would have been the lower negligence standard, that somehow you would be like, well, I can't even joke in today's society. I can't even joke about hitting Justice Chief John Roberts in the head with a gavel, or I'm going to go to jail, I think is ridiculous. And it massively misses this idea that, like, we can't chill the speech of stalkers. Their fucking speech is worthless. Yeah. I don't find value in sending literally like 1,500 messages to a country music artist being like, is that you in the Jeep? Do you want to go to coffee? Do you want to go get groceries? Hey, what are you wearing today? Are you with your friend? That is not valuable speech that I'm concerned about chilling. I'm fucking fine with chilling it. The speech that was really chilled in this case was Cole's Whalen's speech, was the victim in this case, who is a musician who can no longer perform concerts, who can no longer make records, who can no longer do personal appearances, that you have now truly chilled valuable speech, which is an artistic contribution. It's one of the highest forms of speech that we want to protect. But because statistically stalking victims are women, it's almost like the court doesn't give a fuck.
Yes. Yeah. And it is very sad that due to all of this, she gave up her dream of music because she was so terrified.
And you think, okay, finally he's been arrested. Finally he's been convicted. And then you go to the Supreme Court and you get laughed at. Yeah. I mean, there's just, it's the fact that women facing this get laughed at is disgusting. But all that to say, the headlines were I don't want anybody to be misled by the headlines that, oh, stalking is now legal. It created a different standard, but thankfully most states already have that standard in it, and the ones that don't, prosecutors are being made aware. And again, Sparks training is great for that. So hopefully whatever statute it is near you is safe and at least is being implemented in a way that will maintain the illegalities for stalkers.
Ongoing legal issues like these highlight the need for the outreach and advocacy work of organizations like Spark and speakers like Debbie. In the early days after her sister's murder, Debbie worked alongside Congressional Representative Heather Wilson from New Mexico to lobby for greater awareness by sharing Peggy's story on a national scale. In July of 2003, just 6 months after losing her sister, Debbie testified before Congress alongside Mark Sparks. That same day, Representative Wilson introduced a congressional resolution that would establish January 2004, the one-year anniversary of Peggy's death, as National Stalking Awareness Month. Debbie said at the time that she hoped increased awareness would lead to a more uniform response from law enforcement officials across the country. In 2005, one of Peggy's friends worked with the California state legislature to pass Peggy's Law. Patrick had used a private investigator to obtain Peggy's location, and the new statute was designed to address that. Signed by Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, Peggy's Law made it a misdemeanor for anyone targeted by a domestic violence restraining order to try to locate the victim by hiring a private investigator, using a friend or relative, or any other third-party means.
And sadly, in that article that it was announcing Peggy's Law was like not only private investigators, but sometimes stalkers will manipulate their new partners into going into domestic violence shelters to try to find their ex, or these, saying, oh, well, she owes me some money. So can you just help me just go up and see if that's her? And I'm glad that that is also criminalized on its own.
Absolutely. Driven by the grief of losing her sister, Debbie has since become one of the nation's leading speakers on the subject of stalking and continues to work with nonprofits and government leaders to advocate for stalking victims. National Stalking Awareness Month has been held annually every January for 20 years now. Its purpose is to increase the public's understanding of the crime of stalking. Recent studies show that every year, 13.5 million people in the U.S. are victims of stalking. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men are likely to have a stalker at some point in their lives. According to Spark, the average stalking case lasts 2 years, although they can sometimes span the victim's entire lifetime. Over 80% of the time, the stalker knows their victim, and 40% of the time, it's their intimate partner. Stalking statutes have now been enacted in all 50 states, U.S. territories, many Indian tribes, as well as in many other countries. There is also a federal stalking statute punishable by 5 years up to life in prison, depending on the severity of the stalker's behavior. However, the recent Supreme Court decision shows there is still so much work to be done to advocate for victims of a crime that Supreme Court justices laugh at, while experts describe as homicide in slow motion. If you or someone you know is being stalked, help is available. For resources and information on your rights, contact the Victim Connect Resource Center at victimconnect.org or 1-855-4-VICTIM. If you're interested in learning more about stalking awareness or would like training or materials on stalking prevention, visit Spark's website at stalkingawareness.org. Links to this information are available in our episode description. So what do we think?
It's one of those where, 2003 was so long ago, but it clearly
really
not.
Yeah.
To see. And that's why we still, 20 years on of National Stalking Awareness Month, it's still necessary. And I'm actually glad that this is coming out on the last day of Stalking Awareness Month, because it shouldn't stop at January 31st.
No.
Like, we got to think about stalking February 1st and every other day thereafter. And we all can't solve every single problem, but in whatever capacity we're in, I think we can find where we can do the good that we can do to the extent we can do it, where you have a colleague at work going, man, my ex-boyfriend left another note on my card. It's like, hey, you might want to talk to somebody about that. That could be considered stalking. And, I'm not trying to make anything of it, but you have some rights, just the smallest bit of, people Dana brought up, like, using stalking as like, oh, I'm going to totally stalk them later, of like, just being aware that, like, that's not like, oh, that's going to trigger someone and hurt their feelings, but, oh, you've now kind of used it in the common parlance and brought it down in the severity.
You're kind of watering down the definition of it by throwing this word around when it's not a word that should be just casually tossed around as like a joke almost. It's a serious crime. It's a serious offense. And yes, being like a safe space for people that in your life that might be going through something like this, and informing them. Like, a lot of people don't know these things. They don't know the language or what is going on to name it and claim it. So, being that person that can reach out to someone and let them know, like, hey, just FYI, and sending some resources, and also speaking up when you see stuff. And that is especially goes for our Supreme Court justices and lawmakers, but also for just everyday civilians, not like joking or minimizing, or if some guy, is talking about like, well, yeah, she broke up with me, but I still got her location on my phone so I can track her wherever, like not just letting stuff like that slide, calling people out on that kind of behavior.
Yeah, being like, really, man, that's gross. Like, we don't like, just leave her alone. I think oftentimes it's sad, but that social pressure is even as effective as law enforcement. Sometimes that might piss them off, but having friends, family, loved ones that are like, yo, you need to do something because this is not a healthy way to interact with people. And on the flip side, younger, someone said, I can't recall if it was Debbie or Dana, kind of like the younger generation going, he texted me like 30 times in a row. Like, he must really like me. And it's like, no, that's, if you didn't respond, that's kind of inappropriate behavior.
Controlling.
That's not healthy. Yeah.
No.
That's not a healthy love. And like, what does healthy love look like and things like that?
Yeah.
So just finding the part we can play, and especially if you have any reach in the law enforcement community system or victims sport, victims advocacy. That is one thing that I think has come a long way since 2002, 2003 is having crime victims compensation funds and having victims advocates who are able to say, hey, this is something you can access. If you need to move, you have the funds to be reimbursed for that. Things like you're not like, you shouldn't feel stuck in the place that your stalker knows you're at and your abuser knows you're at just because you don't have the means to move. So, anything we can do, I think, will help change the conversation on stalking, and especially given just this how often it happens.
Yeah.
Like I said, I didn't know. I was like, oh, I just thought I had a crazy ex. It's like, no, you were technically stalked when all of that happened. And knowing that the laws are still intact, despite this Supreme Court ruling that it is not legal to stalk, it is I think was a blow to victims, but at least insofar as like the laws were kind of already prepared for it. And just you as a lawmaker go, okay, I guess we have to rewrite our stalking legislation. That's okay. And being responsive and making sure your lawmakers are responsive. So thanks to folks like Debbie for being able to, take that broken heart and make it into something that has made such a big difference, and for sharing her sister's story, not just with the whole world, but specifically with us. I feel very honored that we're able to chat with her and benefit from Dana's knowledge and awareness on this, and have another organization that we can, keep top of mind and help work with as we continue on.
Yes. Thank you to both of them so much. And go to Spark's website, stalkingawareness.org. There's wealth of information on just how to inform yourself, but also if you want to have someone come out and, speak to your organization. You don't have to work in law enforcement. You can just be in a corporate job to have, someone come out and speak to everybody. Like every stuff like this, like there's not a demographic. It does. I mean, Taylor Swift her stalker was just let out of jail, and he's been arrested 3 times in front of her New York house in the past 5 days. So
within hours of being released.
Immediately was let out because he was arrested and went right back. So, I mean, and she is arguably the most powerful person in the world. And then you've got people that are just everyday people that are facing the same types of things. So you don't have to be, a celebrity or in a job where like it seems like this would happen to inform yourself or have others be informed. Like I think everybody should go through training like this and have this type of information.
No, definitely. That's why I told Jill, who runs Fearless Dallas, the organization here I'm on the board for. I was like, maybe we can do this type of training, in concert with, because we do all kinds of training. But I even was like, we got to reach out to Spark and get the training for us too, because it's to help women kind of get back on their feet after either a situation that they've been in, or they just want a career change or whatever, and just naming it, even if it's not currently happening, or more importantly, naming it while it's happening. I think it's so vital. So thanks. Shout out to Spark and the good work they do, and to Debbie as well.
Absolutely. This episode of Sinisterhood is made possible with the help of our amazing patrons.
If you're interested in supporting the show, consider joining our Patreon. You'll get access to ad-free regular episodes, weekly bonus content. You're able to vote on episode topics, join our monthly live streams, and more.
Keep it creepy.
Mwahaha.